The living room door burst open, the hurried, frantic sound of the lock snapping shut echoing through the room, as rushed and desperate as the breathless rhythm of the two people inside. Outside, laughter and wedding music still floated through the night air, carried by the breeze, but in here, all that remained was a suffocating tension, the tangled breaths of two bodies that did not belong to each other. Her hand pressed firmly against his back, pulling him closer with a force that made it seem as though if she let go, reason would return and shatter the moment. The evening gown slipped from her shoulder, revealing delicate, trembling skin under the dim light. "We shouldn't," she whispered, but the very sound of her voice only served to ignite their desire, fanning the flames higher. Their eyes locked, wild with panic, burning with longing, like fugitives fleeing from an invisible law lurking just beyond that door. He didn't answer. Instead, his wandering hand drew her in, his hot breath searing the skin of her neck. In that instant, the world outside seemed to disappear. There was no more music, no more toasts and laughter, no wedding to take place in the morning. There was only this: two souls drawn together by words left unspoken, confessions never voiced, and a vague, nameless fear of what the future might bring. She bit her lip, eyes squeezed shut as if trying to erase every guilty thought. He murmured her name softly into her ear, not the name of the bride-to-be he was to marry in the morning, but the name of the guest who had just appeared, pulling him out of every plan and promise. And in that fleeting moment, both of them knew. The line between right and wrong had been erased. Conscience and temptation alike had no path back. The sound of fabric falling to the floor, the urgent, trembling breaths filling the small space, and everything exploded. Neither dared to think of the morning, of vows, or of the eyes waiting outside. All that remained was feeling, instinct, and a night that would never again be spoken of. The living room door closed with frantic urgency, the sound of the lock echoing through the small space, pounding in Julia's chest like a final warning. Outside, the music from the pre-wedding party still played, golden light slipping through the doorframe, falling on her bare, trembling back. Julia stood frozen for a heartbeat, her hand pressed against the door as if willing herself to wake up. But every cell in her body screamed to plunge deeper into the temptation that had just opened before her. Behind her, Ethan approached, his breath hot on the nape of her neck, stirring memories of a distant past Julia thought she had buried forever. He didn't touch her right away. Just his breath, just the closeness, was enough for Julia to feel shivers running down her spine. A blend of fear and excitement, regret, and the desperate longing to live truly, even if just this once. "We shouldn't," Julia whispered, her voice a fragile plea and a final reminder to herself. But both she and Ethan knew the boundaries of morality had blurred from the moment their eyes met again at tonight's party. He placed a hand on her shoulder, so light that Julia couldn't tell if it was real or just an illusion conjured by a night of wine and cigarette smoke. "You're still the same, Julia." Ethan's voice was rough, his breath uneven. "When you tremble like that, I know you're lying to yourself." Julia bit her lip hard, the sharp pain at the tip of her tongue bringing a fleeting clarity. She turned to face him in the dim light. Ethan's face was older, his blue-gray eyes still deep, yet the sadness in them had only deepened. They stood close enough to feel the scent of perfume, the taste of wine, the pounding of hearts in their chests. Outside, the laughter and chatter of the guests drifted through the door, reminding Julia of reality. Tomorrow she would wear the pure white wedding dress, walk hand in hand with David, the perfect man her family had always wanted for her. Every detail had been planned. Purple orchid arches along the aisle, silver banquet tables glowing in candlelight, a guest list full of powerful names. Julia's whole life seemed charted out on a flawless map, except for tonight. "Ethan," Julia's voice broke with a sob, "you shouldn't be here. I'm about to get married. We ended things a long time ago." Ethan lowered his head, his hand tracing lightly across Julia's bare skin, lingering at her waist, holding her as if afraid she'd vanish. "I left because I thought it was best for you," he whispered. "But since that day, not once have I stopped thinking about you. Everything I did was to forget, but nothing ever erased you from my mind." Julia closed her eyes, letting the tears run down her cheeks. Memories flooded back. Rainy afternoons cycling along the riverbank with Ethan, laughter echoing in the air. Skipped classes, wandering the city, holding hands like outcasts from the world. But it all ended as quickly as it began. Julia's family never accepted a poor boy with no future like Ethan. He left without a word, shattering her heart and leaving only duty and the dream of a quiet life. In this moment, all Julia's old wounds bled and healed at once. She wanted to run from this room, yet just as much wanted to stay, to dissolve in old embraces, at least one last time before she became someone else. Ethan lifted her chin, his gaze probing her soul. "If tomorrow you become someone else's wife, let me hold you just once more. Let me know I truly loved, that I didn't let go too easily." Those words cut like a knife, both cruel and gentle. Julia said nothing more. She let Ethan's hand slide down her back, feeling jolts of electricity through her skin. Everything blurred, music, voices, lights, leaving only warmth and the bittersweet taste of an old kiss. When their lips met, all reason vanished. Julia trembled, out of fear and an undying, fierce longing. She wondered if she would regret this for the rest of her life, or regret it forever if she never dared to live true to herself. Ethan lifted her, setting her gently on the long sofa by the window. Streetlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating Julia's flushed face, her eyes shining with both wine and tears. He leaned in, kissed her forehead, whispering words only they could hear. His hand glided over her shoulder, down her back, slipping beneath fragile fabric, touching skin he'd yearned for through all the lost years. Julia did not resist. She surrendered, melting into Ethan as if nothing outside existed anymore. In that moment, every obligation, every promise, every duty disappeared, leaving just two people. A past that could not be reclaimed, a fragile present, and a future neither dared imagine. They surrendered to the night, at once urgent and drawn out, each breath, each laugh, each tear weaving a silent love song only Julia and Ethan would ever hear. Julia gasped when Ethan whispered her name, his hand tightening gently on hers, pulling her close as if afraid the dream would dissolve. She clung to his shoulder, feeling the wild rhythm of his heartbeat, the heat of skin on skin. She wanted to carve this moment into memory, to keep something truly hers, before it all became the past. Every gesture, every kiss, every whisper was a farewell too hard to speak. The night drifted on, no one keeping count of time. Outside, the party faded, guests left one by one, and only silence lingered, like a velvet curtain awaiting dawn. Julia and Ethan lay together on the sofa, two naked bodies beneath a thin blanket. They said nothing more, just held each other tight, caressed softly, as if making up for all the lost years. Julia nestled her head against Ethan's chest, eyes closed, floating somewhere between dream and reality. Sometimes, silent tears slipped down her cheeks, tangled in his hair, absorbed into the skin of the man she had loved most in her life. Ethan wiped away Julia's tears with gentle kisses, no reproach, no guilt. He only held her, for as long as he could, as if nothing could part them in this moment. Julia drifted to sleep in Ethan's arms, the gentle music from afar echoing in her mind. She dreamt of a distant afternoon, the two of them sitting on the grass, a breeze blowing, the scent of fresh-cut grass thick in the air, Ethan strumming his guitar, her head resting on his shoulder, laughter sparkling beneath the sun. Happiness so brief, but enough to warm a whole lifetime. When Julia woke, dawn was breaking. The lamp in the room cast a faint glow, and outside the window, the first light of morning reached in. Ethan was still asleep, his arm draped over her waist, his breathing steady, impossibly peaceful. Julia moved quietly, careful not to wake him. She gazed at Ethan's face, new lines, eyes closed, lips rough but softened by a gentle smile. She wanted to keep this image, to tuck it deep in her heart as the greatest secret of her life. She gathered her robe, slipped it on, and went to the window. Below, the grass was wet with dew, rows of chairs ready for the wedding, garlands of purple flowers shimmering in the morning light. Julia felt lost in all this perfection, a betrayer, a woman unable to be true to herself, a girl caught at the crossroads of duty and love. She turned to look at Ethan one last time. She knew this moment would pass, this memory would become the past, but it would always be a part of her, a bittersweet scar that could never be erased. Her phone rang, a message from David, asking if she'd slept well, reminding her of the morning's wedding preparations. Julia held her phone, her hand trembling. She replied with a short message, then looked down, her fingers still bore the imprint of last night. She quietly returned to Ethan's side, bent to kiss his forehead one last time. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered, not knowing if he could hear. Ethan stirred, his hand unconsciously finding hers, then letting go as he sank back into sleep. Julia opened the door and stepped out. The door closed softly, cutting off every thread binding her to the past. She leaned against the wall, eyes shut, breathing deep, gathering all her broken pieces to prepare for the greatest role of her life, the perfect bride. At the end of the hallway, her mother waited, a kind face touched with worry. Julia smiled, hiding every trace of a long night from her expression. She slipped an arm around her mother, entered the dressing room, letting the stylists arrange her hair, apply makeup, fix every detail of the white gown. In the mirror, Julia looked deep into her own eyes. There, she still saw a distant gaze, a sorrow with no name, a strange light flickering, an echo of a forbidden night, of a love once thought dead now quietly burning again inside her, woven into every strand of hair, every fold of her dress, every tear not yet fallen. The light of dawn slipped through the curtains, golden and delicate as silk, quietly filling the room where Julia sat before the mirror. The makeup artist was carefully applying powder, crafting a flawless base, a mask for the ideal bride her whole family expected. Julia gazed at her own reflection, searching for the girl she was just yesterday, but all she found was a stranger. A woman weary and hollow after a sleepless, endless night. Her mother's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a gesture meant to comfort and encourage, but which, for Julia, only added to the weight pressing down. Julia turned to smile, trying to hide the red, sleepless eyes. Her mother noticed nothing out of place, only continued to fuss about every detail of the ceremony. The dress, the bouquet, the wedding rings, the bridesmaids. Positions, The music that would play as Julia walked down the aisle, these details had once excited her. But now, they were little more than a muffled background noise to the storm churning inside. People bustled in and out, making last-minute checks. Bridesmaids chattered and laughed, carrying billowing dresses, the room filled with white flowers and sunlight. Watching them, Julia felt a strange pang of envy. Those young women were still free, still able to love, still able to make mistakes without paying a price so steep. Her phone buzzed again, a message from David, her soon-to-be husband. He asked if she was ready, spoke of the happiness awaiting them, and ended with a heart emoji that Julia found chillingly cold. She held her phone, fingers trembling on the keyboard, then put it down without replying. All David's sweet words, his gentle concern, his loving gaze, they were real, but inside Julia was a void nothing could fill. She closed her eyes, let out a long sigh, and once again found herself remembering the night before. That night, the room awash in soft yellow light, music echoing through the walls, the taste of red wine lingering on her lips. Julia recalled every detail, every movement of Ethan, every glance, every whispered word, every gentle touch that made her world tremble. She remembered the hesitation, the moments of doubt, then the way they both fell into each other like drowning souls reaching for breath. In Ethan's arms, Julia was no longer the perfect bride, no longer the dutiful daughter, and certainly not the center of some grand, lavish wedding. She was simply a woman, loved, desired, living truly with all her instincts and pain. Ethan's hands traced her skin, gentle and urgent, as if he wanted to carve his name into every inch of her. Every kiss, from hesitant to feverish, was an unspoken goodbye. Julia had wept when Ethan held her close, when he whispered, "If tomorrow you leave me forever, at least let me know that tonight you were mine, one last time." That sentence cut deeply into Julia's heart, making her want to flee, yet also wish to be lost forever in his embrace. Countless memories rushed back like a flock of birds. Rainy afternoons by the river, humble yet warm dinners, Ethan's eyes sparkling beneath summer sun, half-made promises, unfinished goodbyes, all of it like a flood, washing away every defense, leaving her bare, fragile, but perhaps for the first time in years, truly alive. She remembered Ethan's gaze on her, intense, burning, as if the world held only the two of them. When it was over, as they lay together in silence, Julia had asked, "Do you regret it, Ethan?" Ethan shook his head, smiling sadly. "I only regret leaving you too soon. If I could do it all over, I would never let go, but now, all we have is tonight." Julia did not answer. She only nodded, letting her tears soak his shoulder. She knew that with the sunrise, everything would revert to its old order, and she would have to bury this forbidden night forever in her memory. A knock on the door cut through her thoughts. The head bridesmaid entered, smiling. 15 minutes left, Julia. Everything's ready. You look beautiful, truly." Julia smiled back stiffly, reminding herself to be strong. She stood, taking in her reflection. The pure white gown hugged her slender frame, soft lace draping like mist, the crystal belt glittering in the sun. Everything was perfect, everything as it should be, except for Julia's heart, which was shattering into pieces. Her mother approached, smoothing a stray lock of hair, whispering, "You'll be the most beautiful bride. I'm so proud of you." Julia felt the warmth of her mother's hand, but a chill ran through her heart. She wanted to confess everything, to speak of last night, of Ethan, of all the things she had never dared to say, but her throat closed up, the words lost. The final steps took Julia out of the room, down hallways lined with flowers, through the affectionate gazes of friends and family. With every step, Julia felt she was walking further from herself, moving toward a destiny already chosen for her. Nearing the ceremony hall, Julia suddenly saw Ethan standing in a distant corner, mingling with the crowd. He wore a deep blue suit, a small flower pinned to his lapel, looking quiet yet striking. Their eyes met for only a moment, but it was enough to bring back everything, memories surging like waves. Julia froze, her feet rooted in place. Her heart pounded, a wave of anguish rising in her chest. Ethan didn't smile, just nodded quietly, a silent blessing, or perhaps a final goodbye. The bridesmaid urged her on, "Come on, everyone's waiting." Julia nodded, took a deep breath, doing her best to hide the trembling in her eyes. When the doors to the hall opened, Julia walked down the flower-strewn aisle, sunlight blazing on her pristine dress. All eyes turned to her, her parents, friends, and David beaming at the end of the path. She heard her heart hammering, and somewhere in her mind, Ethan's voice echoed. "If you belong to another, remember, I loved you truly." Every step felt heavier. Julia wondered if she could keep this secret forever, or if someday, David's gaze would see through every shadow in her heart. Could a single night's mistake destroy a whole life, or was it only a silent scar no one else would ever see? When Julia reached David, he extended his hand, holding hers tight. His eyes were gentle, warm, without the slightest suspicion. Julia smiled, trying to seem calm, but deep down, she knew she had both lost and found herself in a single, unrepeatable night. The ceremony unfolded smoothly, every ritual carried out as perfectly as a rehearsed script. Everyone offered blessings, took photos, toasted, laughed. Julia mingled, smiled, received compliments, posed with David amid sunlight and blossoms. Yet every time she glanced back, she caught Ethan's eyes somewhere in the crowd. Silent, aching, forever part of a past she could never reclaim. Every blessing, every hug, every smile grew distant, as if they belonged to another woman, another life. As the sun set, Julia found a quiet moment by the window, gazing out to the distant sea. The waves kept rolling in, oblivious to everything that had happened. Julia wondered if she could choose again, would she have the courage to live for herself, for the love she'd lost, or would she still choose the safe, perfect path in everyone else's eyes? Behind her, David came up and wrapped his arms around her. "Are you okay? Today is the happiest day of our lives." Julia nodded, leaning on his shoulder, eyes far away. "Yes, I'm fine," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. But deep inside, Julia knew her life had changed forever in just one night. Night fell. The party ended, guests drifted away, returning the villa by the sea to its quiet state. Julia sat at her dressing table, removing each pin, each necklace, every piece of jewelry falling like fragments of a peeled-away past. She looked in the mirror one more time, not the perfect bride, not the center of attention, just Julia with sad eyes and a heart full of scars. Ethan was gone, leaving no message, never seeking her out again. Julia knew everything was over, or perhaps only just beginning, for a long journey of wrestling, regret, and forgiveness. Outside, the waves kept rolling ashore, unaware of the secrets people hide in their hearts. When the door to the honeymoon suite quietly closed, the air stilled. Only the steady sound of ocean waves lapping the shore came in through the slightly open window. Julia sat down at the edge of the bed, feeling the cold silk of her white wedding gown brush against her skin, leaving strange, cool traces. The spacious room, draped in purple orchids, white ribbons, and half-burnt scented candles radiated luxury and perfection. But inside Julia was a hollowness she could not name. David closed the door gently, turning back to his wife with a gentle gaze that also held a clear hint of anticipation. He came closer, removing each hairpin, each veil, each row of tiny buttons on Julia's back with the care of a man who had just married the woman he loved. Julia tried to smile, masking her tension with small jokes and familiar gestures, running her hand through her hair, yet the storm inside her heart had not passed. "Are you tired?" David asked in his warm, low voice, his hand gently on her shoulder as if afraid to hurt her. Julia nodded, answering with a faint smile, but her eyes looked elsewhere, avoiding the overwhelming sincerity in his. Whether David noticed the change in Julia or not, he chose to believe only what he wished. He sat beside her, pulling her into his arms and whispering words of happiness. Together they drank the last glass of champagne of the day, looked out over the night sea, spoke of the future, the honeymoon that would start tomorrow. Julia listened, trying to absorb every word her husband said, every vision of their future. The trips, a little house, the first cries of children in her and David's arms. It was all beautiful, safe, and proper, yet somewhere deep in her soul, Julia felt herself as an outsider, watching her own life from afar. Their first night of marriage passed gently, almost awkwardly. David was patient and tender, not demanding more from Julia than she could give. They caressed, exchanged soft kisses, a closeness full of courtesy. Julia closed her eyes, letting her body respond to David, but in her mind, images of the night before with Ethan lingered like ghosts. Every touch from David reminded her of the wild, instinctual moments, the burning kisses of the man she could no longer reach. After David drifted to sleep, Julia quietly got up, slipped on her robe, and stepped out onto the balcony. The night sky was endless, the sea shimmering in moonlight, the waves crashing as if echoing the beat of her past. She leaned on the railing, listening to the wind, letting her tears fall in silence, unseen by anyone. In that moment, Julia felt small, alone, trapped between two worlds. One, a peaceful but colorless present; the other, a tempestuous past that had resurfaced for just one short night. The days that followed flowed in the routine of new happiness. A honeymoon at a distant island resort, golden sun, blue sea, a suite with an ocean view, candlelit dinners, and red wine. David was always by her side, carefully capturing every moment, looking after Julia with gentle attention. Each day, he took her for walks on the sand, swimming in the waves, laughing together like happy lovers. Julia played her part as the new wife, cheerful, gentle, thanking her husband for the little things, listening to his work stories, his dreams for the future he always shared. By day, Julia almost forgot the storm inside her. The sound of waves, the sunlight, the scent of sunscreen and salt helped her set aside memories and immerse herself in her new life. But when night fell, in a strange room beside her sleeping husband, visions of Ethan would return clearer than ever. There were nights when Julia awoke startled, heart pounding from a fleeting dream. She saw herself back in the old room, Ethan still there, reaching for her, eyes burning with longing for what could not be. She would sit up, drenched in sweat, glancing around to find only David, peaceful, unaware of the undercurrents within his wife. One afternoon, as the sunset burned outside the window, David drew Julia down onto a wooden chair on the sand, and together they drank glasses of red wine. He asked, smiling softly, "Are you happy, Julia?" Julia nodded, giving a gentle smile. Yes, I'm happy. But her eyes held a sadness she couldn't hide. David looked down, taking her hand, his voice suddenly thoughtful. I know everything between us has been so perfect. But I also know you had to give up a lot to be with me. Julia, I don't want you to feel trapped or burdened. If there ever comes a time when you're not okay, I hope you'll tell me and not endure it alone. Julia was surprised by David's sensitivity. She suddenly felt guilty, pitied her husband, and felt even more tormented by the secret she was keeping. She squeezed David's hand, looking at him for a long time, wanting to confess everything, but swallowed it down, only whispering, I know, thank you, David. I truly appreciate you always being here. David smiled, gently stroking her hand, his eyes as soft as the sea at dusk, without a single ripple. When the honeymoon ended, Julia and David returned to the city. Their new home was ready, a penthouse with a wide balcony overlooking the park, modern interiors, everything arranged to Julia's taste. She reorganized the bookshelves, picked out new curtains, placed potted plants in every corner, trying to create a warm space for the two of them. David threw himself into work, eagerly planning their future, always trying to make time for Julia each night. Julia began to return to her normal life, going to work, seeing friends, attending parties, family gatherings. Everything looked normal on the surface, but only she knew, inside herself, that nothing was ever the same. Each time she looked in the mirror, Julia saw lost eyes, a deep sadness she could never erase. On rainy afternoons, Julia stood by the window, watching droplets race down the glass, remembering days long ago with Ethan. She would quietly close her eyes, wondering if she'd had the courage to keep her old love, would everything be different? Or if she hadn't made that mistake on the night before the wedding, would her soul be at peace now? One evening, Julia came home early, David still at the office. She wandered the apartment, taking in every small object, every wedding photo on the wall, every vase of freshly arranged flowers. An inexplicable loneliness rose in her chest. Julia opened the small drawer beneath her vanity, pulling out an old letter, a wedding invitation on the back, Ethan's neat handwriting. Wishing you happiness. I will always remember you, Julia. She read it again, and tears spilled uncontrollably. Memories of Ethan surged up. Those eyes, that tight embrace, the last kiss, the burning breath, all like a slow-burning scar that would never heal. Julia sat down on the carpet, hugging the letter to her chest, weeping like a child. She knew she was betraying David, not with her body, but with a heart that had never been whole. She was afraid of living like this forever, afraid the secrets would one day be revealed, afraid of having to choose between duty and feeling. Late that night, when David came home, he found Julia sitting on the balcony, eyes gazing into the distance. He sat beside her, wrapping his arms around her, whispering, "Are you cold? Come inside, it's windy out here." Julia shook her head, leaning against his shoulder, searching for a piece she couldn't find. David stroked her back softly, silent for a while before asking, "Are you sad?" Julia only smiled, shook her head, and hugged him. In that embrace, she felt emptier than ever. The night sky was silent, only the distant sounds of traffic and the yellow glow of streetlights on the pavement below. Julia looked up, watching a shooting star cross the sky, quietly wishing for her heart to find peace, for her wounds to heal, or at least for the memories of Ethan to fade away like a distant dream. But deep down, Julia knew, there are nights, there are loves that once lost can never be reclaimed. Only a sweet ghost clinging to the soul, bringing both pain and an ache you can never quite let go. The weeks that followed drifted by like a long, endless rain, soaking into every crevice of Julia's soul. On the surface, everything remained suffocatingly perfect. Work was going well, family dinners were lively, weekends spent on outings with friends, couples, photos hearted on social media. But inside, Julia grew more and more exhausted. Dreams of Ethan haunted her ever more frequently, not only in the darkness, but even in waking moments. Whenever an old song played, when a sudden rain fell, or with just a casual touch from David at the dinner table. One autumn afternoon, the city bathed in gentle sunlight, Julia sat in her favorite cafe, catching up on a project report. Everything was as usual until she looked up and caught that gaze, Ethan standing across the street, leaning against a lamp post, hands in his coat pockets, looking just as he had the last time she'd seen him at the wedding. For a moment, Julia thought she was hallucinating. But then Ethan walked over, pulled out a chair opposite her, and Julia felt her heart pounding, painfully tight in her chest. "How are you?" Ethan asked, his voice deeper and warmer than before, still tinged with gentle irony. Julia gripped her coffee cup, her hand trembling. "You shouldn't be here. I'm married now, Ethan." "I know," Ethan looked straight into her eyes, "but I also know you're not all right. No one can live with a dead heart, Julia." Those words left Julia breathless. She lowered her head, swallowing the words she longed to speak, unable to form them. Suddenly, the world around them seemed to thicken. All the noise, the laughter, the background music faded away. Ethan did not push, he only waited in silence. His gaze was gentle, without reproach, only a deep understanding, something Julia hadn't found in anyone for so long. They sat in silence for a long while, until Ethan quietly placed an old photograph on the table. It was a picture of the two of them by the river years ago. Julia's radiant smile, Ethan holding a guitar, hair tousled, eyes sparkling with happiness. "I want to give you back the past, if you need it," he said softly. "But if you want to forget, I'm ready to disappear. Julia, you don't have to carry me with you forever if it only brings you pain." Those words, that presence, everything made Julia feel like she was sitting on a bed of fire. She wanted to keep Ethan close, yet also push him away forever. But when Ethan left, leaving the photo and a last glance that never turned back, Julia knew she would never again be the perfect wife in the traditional sense. In the days that followed, Julia grew even quieter. David noticed, but thought she was simply tired from work. He cared for her, suggested trips, tried to create a joyful atmosphere. Sometimes David would draw Julia into his arms, painting dreams of children, of long journeys, of the seaside house they had once promised each other. Julia nodded, forced a smile, but the loneliness inside her deepened, like a bottomless chasm. One rainy night, after David had fallen asleep, Julia quietly left the house, taking only a thin coat and wandering through the empty streets. She walked with no destination, trying only to escape the four walls, to run from memories that clung too tightly. Rain soaked her hair and face, but Julia felt no cold. She was a wandering ghost, with no home, no place to belong. Suddenly, Ethan appeared on the corner, as if he had always known where Julia would be. He walked over in silence, draped his coat over her shoulders. "You'll get sick," he whispered, his eyes full of a strange tenderness. Julia broke down, her tears blending with the rain until she couldn't tell them apart. Ethan pulled her into his arms. No questions, no judgments, only letting her lean on his shoulder and cry out every pain, loneliness, fear, and unspoken guilt. In the rain, Julia realized that some things in life cannot be named, cannot be severed, like love, forgiveness, and the regrets that last a lifetime. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, did not know what she should choose, but she knew that tonight, in these arms, she was truly herself again, if only for one more time. When Julia returned home, Ethan's coat was still draped over her shoulders. David was awake, waiting under the dim light of the living room. He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes full of words he couldn't say. "Where were you, Julia?" David asked, his voice steady but trembling at the end. Julia stood in silence at the doorway, rain dripping from her hair onto the wooden floor, guilt gnawing at her. She didn't answer, only quietly removed the coat, folded it, set it on the chair, and walked into the bedroom, leaving David standing alone with the first seeds of doubt growing silently in his heart. Outside, the rain kept falling, as if trying to wash away every trace, every wound, every truth. But Julia knew there are ghosts that never sleep, and one day everything would have to face the light. A few days after that rainy night, Julia and David's house seemed to still carry a damp, inexplicable chill. The atmosphere at home had grown taut as a stretched string, even as the two maintained all the rituals of daily life. Silent breakfasts at the table, a farewell hug before leaving for work, polite questions about health, work, weekend plans. But deep in David's eyes, there was something Julia couldn't name. Not anger, not indifference, but the silent pain of someone who had begun to see the truth even if no one wanted to say it out loud. Julia grew increasingly quiet, moving through the rooms like a shadow. On nights when David came home late, she sat on the balcony, listening to the sounds of traffic and the whispering wind, unable to find that feeling of peace again. Ethan's coat remained, hidden in the deepest drawer, like a small wound she dared not touch but could never throw away. One evening, as Julia turned off the lights to go to bed, David stood in the doorway, the dim glow highlighting the dark circles under his eyes. "We need to talk," David said, his voice hoarse, calm but unyielding. Julia sat up straight, a vague fear suddenly washing over her. David came closer, sitting down at the edge of the bed across from his wife, gazing deeply into her eyes. "Julia, I love you. That's never changed, no matter who you are or what you've done. But I can't pretend not to see you haven't been yourself since the wedding. I don't ask what you've done, where you've been, who you've seen. I just want to know, can you really stay? Can you let go of the past and live this life with me? Or am I just a safe harbor for a heart that was never truly mine?" Julia's tears spilled over, all the words she'd been holding back finally breaking free. She sobbed like a child, both ashamed and grateful for permission to be weak. "I'm sorry, David, I tried. I truly wanted to be a good wife, to live this life with you. But every time I close my eyes, I find myself somewhere else. With someone else, I can't erase the past, and I can't lie to you or to myself." David embraced her, his hand gently stroking Julia's hair, trembling but determined. "I don't need you to forget. I just need you to be brave enough to be honest, with yourself and with me. If your heart still belongs elsewhere, if you need time or need to leave, I'll let you decide. I just want you to be truly happy, Julia." His words cut like a knife, painful, but also freeing. Julia sat in silence beside her husband for a long time, their hands clasped tightly, both crying quietly together, for all the illusions, the promises, the beautiful days now left as empty shells. In the days that followed, Julia took leave from work, staying home for a few days, citing health reasons. She spent her days wandering the apartment, rearranging things, taking out mementos, opening drawers of old memories. She reread old diaries, love letters from years ago, even the photograph Ethan had left in the cafe, each like a slow rewind film, reminding Julia of every mistake, every happiness lost, every fear she couldn't name. One afternoon, as the light faded beyond the window, the doorbell rang. Julia opened the door to find Ethan standing there, not announced, no invitation, only a heavy silence packed with 1,000 unsaid words. "I know I shouldn't be here," Ethan whispered, "but I can't leave until I hear your last words. Julia, if you need me, just say so, I'll stay. If you want me to disappear, I'll go far away and never trouble you again." Julia looked at Ethan for a long time, her heart echoing with 100 confessions and questions. She didn't know what to do, whether to hold on or let go, or whether she could ever forgive herself. She could only whisper, "I don't want to lose you, but I don't want to hurt anyone else either. I'm tired, Ethan. I no longer know what's right or wrong." Ethan stepped forward, wrapping Julia in a tight embrace. There were no more explanations, no more accusations. Only two people too weary from running from their own feelings, finally holding each other again, as if all these years had led to this moment. That night, Julia wrote a long letter to David, confessing everything. About the night before the wedding, the unending dreams, the emotions she could not control, all the regrets, torment, and in the end, her deepest apology for the husband who had been too good to her. She left the letter on David's desk, then left the house she once called home. Julia stepped into the night, unafraid, no longer hiding. The night wind bit cold, but her heart had calmed. At the end of the street, Ethan was waiting. The same eyes, the same embrace, still the place she belonged in, even if only for one fleeting moment in her life. In the east, the sky was just turning light. Julia knew a new chapter was beginning, and whatever lay ahead, she would never have to live a lie again. That morning, Julia left her old apartment while the city was still wrapped in mist. In her hand was only a small suitcase, a few sets of clothes, a journal, and the old photograph by the riverside. The streets were cold and wet, the streetlights still dull and yellow, a few taxis gliding by, each carrying its own separate fate. Julia walked slowly, feeling every breath in her chest as if she were finally being given life again after so many days spent suffocating under the thick shell of duty and fear. Ethan was waiting for her at the little cafe at the end of the street, their secret rendezvous in their youth. He had already ordered 2 cappuccinos, one for her, one for himself. When Julia appeared, Ethan just smiled, asking nothing more. They sat across from each other by the window, watching the hurried crowds, each with 100 things to say but choosing only silence. "I left everything for David," Julia finally said after a long quiet. "A letter and an apology that could never be enough. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness." Ethan squeezed her hand gently, warm and resolute. "We don't need to forgive the past, Julia. We just need the courage to live honestly in the present." Julia nodded, her eyes dry after so many nights spent crying herself empty. They made no plans for the future. Both knew life was no longer a rose-colored dream, but a series of new days that needed to be lived with all the honesty and acceptance they could find. Time passed. Julia rented a small apartment near the river, starting everything from scratch. She took a simple job at a bookstore, spent her days reading, writing, learning to cook, and to take care of herself. Every day, she would walk by the river, where the cool breeze brushed her hair, carrying the scent of fresh grass and the laughter of children playing in the nearby park. David read her letter late one night, after many days alone in their big, empty house. He quietly moved out, without complaint, without ever seeking her out again. Through a mutual friend, Julia learned that David had moved to another city, starting his own new life. He still sent her a blessing, brief, calm, just as he had loved Julia through all their peaceful years together. As for Ethan, he stayed in the city, but no longer appeared in Julia's life the way he once did. They met quietly on afternoons, reading together, drinking coffee, sharing the little things of their days. The love between them was no longer wild, demanding, or desperate as before. It had matured, content, grateful for every minute spent together, knowing how to hurt and how to let go at the right time. There were mornings when Julia awoke in her small bed, sunlight falling on the patched wall, birds singing beyond the window, and she smiled in relief. Her life was no longer perfect, but at least it was hers, no longer bound by anyone's expectations but her own. On the anniversary of that broken wedding, Julia allowed herself to cry one last time. She stepped out onto the balcony, looked out across the city, thinking of David, her parents, and the friends who had once hoped, loved, and perhaps been disappointed by her choice. Julia whispered a silent apology, then promised herself she would live worthy of the freedom she had finally won, not to justify the past, but to heal herself in the present. Ethan remained by her side, silent as a mirror reflecting the truest parts of Julia. They no longer spoke of someday, made no dreamy plans. They simply lived each day, fully and honestly. At the end of autumn, on a gentle Sunday morning, Julia and Ethan sat by the river, holding hands and watching the birds soar over the water. Julia rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, exhaling a long breath. No more burdens, no past clinging, only two people who had walked through every storm, every pain and regret, learning at last how to forgive themselves. In the distance, the sun rose, its light glimmering on the sparkling river. Julia closed her eyes, listening to the peaceful beat of her heart, realizing true happiness does not come from anything grand, but from the very moment you dare to face yourself, dare to live honestly, even if the price is a loss that can never be named. And finally, she understood. Only when you have paid for your mistakes with all your heart can you be mature enough to embrace a brand new dawn, even when what lies ahead cannot yet be called peace.